Let's talk about how to fix the adrenal body type. Okay, so are we talking about adrenal fatigue? Are we talking about some adrenal disease? Well, the medical profession doesn't acknowledge adrenal fatigue. They don't really think that it exists. And that's totally fine because what are they going to do? Just give you another drug, give you a steroid? I think if you have adrenal stress, adrenal burnout, adrenal fatigue, whatever you want to call it, I think you should use natural type remedies. So the first question is, where are the adrenals? Well, they're located right above the kidney, right on top of the kidneys. Okay, you have two of them, and they're little triangle glands, and they have an inside and an outside. The outside is called the cortex, adrenal cortex, and then the inside is called the medulla, the adrenal medulla. The main hormone that we're going to focus on the outside is called cortisol. And then the neurotransmitter on the inside that we're going to focus on is called adrenaline. And the entire adrenal system relates to something called fight or flight. And that relates to its purpose, which is to adapt the body to a stress state. Now, what does that mean, adapt the body to a stress state? Well, it's quite interesting that you have an entire system that adapts your body to this very interesting condition or state, which is during stress. Whether you're attacking something, fighting something, or you're running away from something, okay, you have a system to help you survive. So, what this system does through all of its different adaptations is to prepare your body to survive during a stress mode. And of course, this was designed to be more short term, not long term, like we experience nowadays with sustained chronic mental stress. Our bodies were designed to handle a bit more physical stress. So you need more blood flow to certain muscles. You need more heightened energy in your brain to focus in on certain things and solve certain problems relating to survival. You need quick energy, as in glucose energy, and you don't need energy to certain body systems like reproduction, like the immune system, like your digestion. So that's the function of the adrenals. And these hormones go through almost every cell in the body and start to change certain things to adapt the body to prepare for this stress situation. So, what's the significance of that? Well, if you're under chronic mental stress, okay, or you have major losses in your life, or you have surgeries or traumas, which, by the way, all these stresses accumulate over time. And then they create situations where the adrenals become dysfunctional to a certain degree. And I'm not even talking about a disease, I'm talking about like a subclinical problem with the adrenal. At first, you have a higher level of these hormones, and then over time, you start developing like cortisol resistance, just like insulin resistance, where now the cortisol doesn't work, but you have high levels of cortisol and symptoms of low cortisol. It makes it really confusing. But let's go through the symptoms that someone might experience if they have adrenal fatigue or adrenal dysfunction. Number one, their tolerance for stress is lowered. They can't tolerate babysitting a room full of small children at a daycare center for more than 8 hours. They can't tolerate a slow driver in front of them for a period of, 2.5 hours where they're on the freeway. For some reason that bothers them. They definitely can't tolerate incompetent people or people that are considered more stupid or people that make maybe stupid decisions. They just have a low tolerance for that. Unless they're in an environment where everything is logical and perfect, they get impatient. They become irritable and they have sometimes even anxiety. And anxiety is like worry and an inability to decide on something because there's a chronic problem. The moment someone decides and solves a problem, the anxiety is less. Now, it can also affect excessive thinking, analyzing things, especially when you're trying to sleep. In the middle of the night, you're solving all these problems and just keep going and going and going. That's an adrenal symptom. And because the adrenals, the cortisol is another name for that is called glucocorticoid, you actually turn protein into glucose. So you're running your body on glucose. And that's something that your adrenals basically cause your liver to make more sugar to run on sugar fuel because it's quick energy. The problem is stress really equals sugar. And even though you're not eating sugar, you're getting a lot of sugar in the bloodstream, and that can cause blood sugar problems and even, believe it or not, diabetes. And what's happening with all the sugar is that it's going to be converted to cholesterol, not the friendly type. Also, you're getting conversion into fat on the liver, fat in the visceral organs right here, because that's a survival mechanism to hold fat in the midsection. In fact, in really extreme examples, I'll show you in this book right here, SIBA Collection of Medical Illustrations, Volume 4, Endocrine System. And see, this is an adrenal body type right here. You can see the person's holding fat right here, and then the body is extracting protein from the gluteus maximus and putting it right into that part right here, and then taking muscle from this extra muscle here called the quads, putting that right in that midsection right here. So there's all these physiological things that happen throughout the body, which I'm going to get into. Another thing that happens with the adrenal is they get hyperacidity, gastritis. And this is why some people can experience ulcers from stress because the stress activates this acidity, which then burns a hole right through your stomach. The blood pressure goes up with adrenal, okay? You have increased pulse rate. You can have the symptom of asthma. And because you get cortisol resistance, cortisol is normally an anti inflammatory, but now you have the opposite of that, which is a deficiency of cortisol in the cell. And this is why a lot of people with adrenal problems develop inflammation that won't go away. They start developing all sorts of inflammatory disorders and problems within the immune system. In fact, if we just look at inflammation, where that comes from, it comes from the healing response. It can come from an injury. It can come from the immune system. But the immune system controls inflammation in the body, regardless of where it comes from. But the unique thing about the adrenal system is that it's shunting energy away from the immune system. And this is why the white blood cells, which is your entire immune system, is suppressed during stress. And cortisol, this is why they use cortisol or prednisone as a treatment with immune overactivity type inflammatory conditions. So, in other words, when you go through stress and you have high levels of cortisol, your immune system becomes paralyzed. Okay. And you can even develop in that state autoimmune diseases. And so many people develop an autoimmune disease right after a stress event or a major loss. So, any condition that involves inflammation is a condition that involves the adrenal glands. You're also losing certain things like calcium. You're losing potassium for sure. And initially, you're retaining sodium, but then eventually, when the adrenals burn out, you'll lose sodium. So you're losing these electrolytes. And a little point about potassium is when you start losing potassium, the pH changes in the body to a more alkaline state. So anytime you're looking at a loss of potassium, that's associated with an alkaline state. So when people are burnt out, they're not more acidic, they're more alkaline, and that affects their breathing. They tend to get hypoxia or breathing problems. They can't breathe as well. They accumulate a bit too much CO2 and not enough oxygen. I mean, even if you look at someone that is in a panic state, right? They're breathing and they're breathing like crazy. They basically are getting too much oxygen and not the right balance of CO2 because CO2 is needed in a certain amount to help them absorb oxygen, but they have this imbalance of air and they're just suffocating when they're under a panic attack or even in an anxiety state. If you take a look at someone that's in anxiety, look at their breathing. It's not regular. It's kind of like it's not balanced. And this is why regulating the breath can correct an anxiety state really fast and even take someone out of a panic attack, especially if they breathe through their nose and they breathe slowly in and they breathe slowly out. Another thing that's interesting with the adrenals is vitamin D. You tend to lose vitamin D very easily with an adrenal situation. And so the need for certain nutrients, especially vitamin D, goes up as you lose the adrenal function. Now, if we talk about cortisol, cortisol is very similar in function to vitamin D. They act in similar ways. They're both anti inflammatory. And so, any condition that you have that has a problem with cortisol, I would recommend using vitamin D as a remedy. Okay. So, that Include any of the anti-inflammatory conditions like back pain or knee pain or any of that stuff versus a shot of prednisone. So here's the picture of the adrenal body type, an exaggerated picture. Like I said, the midsection, no butt, weakened thigh muscles. You can have memory loss, brain fog, but at night everything becomes more active, especially around 2 o'clock in the morning, where you wake up and you're thinking about problems, things like that. In fact, with classical adrenal problems, you're more awake at 2 o'clock than you are in the morning when you're trying to wake up. Climbing up a flight of stairs, you get out of breath easier, and you might possibly even crave salty things like chips, things like that. Now, when you go to sleep at night, there's four waves of sleep that you go through. Okay. And there's really deep levels of sleep called the delta wave sleep. And then you have the superficial ones, which are called REM. So when you go to sleep, the purpose of sleep is just to get rid of a lot of toxins in the brain and metabolites that are generated through the day, which are kind of byproducts of metabolism. Also, you're getting kind of a rejuvenation of neurotransmitters when you're sleeping. And so, sleep is necessary for the recovery of stress, yet stress inhibits sleep. So, it's definitely a catch 22. Cortisol just messes up the adrenal circadian wave because everything is backwards with the adrenals. The lowest point of cortisol is at 2 o'clock or 2:30 a.m., right? And the highest point is at 8 a.m. in the morning. So with adrenal fatigue, you'll see it's just the opposite. You're very awake at 2, but you really want to sleep like 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, but that's when you have to get up. I had this adrenal problem so bad in my 20s and 30s as well, mainly in my late 20s. I started to get better actually at 28, but here's the thing. It would take me until 11 o'clock a.m. to finally wake up in my head. Now, of course, my diet wasn't helping because I would be living on carbs, but boy, did I have adrenal problems big time. I would wake up at 2, 2:30. There was one night, or multiple nights, but I remember one that I didn't even sleep 1 minute. I laid there all night long listening to my wife Karen saw logs. It was torture. And I remember it was like 7 or 8 o'clock, and I'd get up and I didn't even sleep 1 minute. I was like, this is driving me crazy. You talk about stress, like just not sleeping. I mean, it's terrible. Here's a question. How can someone know what's wrong in the body in relationship to the adrenals? Is there a test that can be done? Is there a blood test? Is there a saliva test? The problem is those aren't really good testing because these hormones travel on the circadian wave. And so if you just check one blood test or one saliva test with your cortisol, you're just getting a snapshot of what's happening at that period of time. To really know what's going on, you have to check it every 4 hours, which is a real pain in the butt. Okay, so there is a saliva test that you can do that, and I've done that, and that's good, but it's kind of a pain in the butt to do, and also takes time and it's a little expensive. I'm going to show you a way better test that's dynamic, that's inexpensive, virtually free. And it really tells you the function of the adrenals versus a very static test. And that is the problem nowadays with testing just about anything. They use static tests, they do CAT scans, MRIs, which is fine to measure like tumors and masses and stuff like that. But that doesn't check the function of something, whether it's the gallbladder or the digestive system or the hormone flow. It doesn't look at that. The first one is called the Ragland's test. And all you need is a blood pressure cuff. Okay, that's all you need. So that's the expense of it. And you check your blood pressure laying down while you're relaxing. Okay. And you're checking the top number and the bottom number. You have the systolic top number, and the bottom number is the diastolic. You're primarily interested in the systolic number. That's the top number only. Okay. So you check your blood pressure lying down, and then you stand up and you check the blood pressure. That's all you have to do, and just record it. Okay. The difference between the systolic and the diastolic is that the systolic is measuring the sympathetic nervous system, the contraction, and the diastolic is measuring the parasympathetic. It just so happens to be a 50-50 split of sympathetic and parasympathetic. And what's interesting about the adrenals is it has no parasympathetic innervation. Okay. So, in other words, it only has an on switch, sympathetic, and no off switch. And I think this is one of the reasons why when you go through stress, it's hard to turn it off because we don't just have an off switch on your adrenals. There's no parasympathetic involvement. So you're looking at this systolic number, right? Now, normally when you lie down and stand up, there's an adrenal adaptation that increases the blood pressure and the pulse rate to be able to push the blood up into the brain, or you would literally pass out. Have you ever like stood up real quickly and felt dizzy? Well, that is a failure of the adrenal system to pump the blood pressure and blood up to your brain fast enough so you don't pass out. There's a severe condition called POTS, which I'm not going to get into, but that's a severe adrenal problem. So, anyway, when you lie down and stand up, that top number should go up a certain amount, like 6 to 10 points. If it goes up a lot more, or it drops down, there's an adrenal dysfunction. Okay. Usually, if it goes up too fast, it's usually a more of an earlier sign of adrenal fatigue where your adrenals are overreacting. And then when it starts to go down, and I've seen this all the time where the systolic just drops way down by 10 points and the person feels really dizzy. This is just a lack of adrenal gland function. The adrenals are weak, they can't adapt to stress. So if they were to run upstairs, boy, they would feel very, very weak and they would just wouldn't have the endurance. And that's one good test is can you do an incline easily or not? People that have good adrenals can, boy, they can go incline, they can do rock climbing, they can run up a hill, no problem with no side effects at all. But the simple dynamic adaptive stress test, Ragland's test, is a good clue on what's going on with the adrenals. So that's number one. Number two evaluates your CO2 tolerance. And remember, I talked about breathing and oxygen and your pH being off? Well, that relates to adrenal fatigue. And this test is going to measure your tolerance to CO2. So you see, you have oxygen and then you have CO2. And as you know, you need oxygen. It takes a little bit of CO2 for oxygen to go into the cells, but you can't live off just CO2. There's going to be a sensation of anxiety if you have too much CO2 and not enough oxygen. In fact, if you suffocate someone, they're going to go immediately into anxiety and then panic attack. So here's what you do: breathe through your nose, step one. Okay. You're going to breathe in and breathe out 3 times through your nose. Okay. On the fourth inhalation, you're going to take in as much air as you can. Okay. And then what you're going to do is you're going to have a timer and you're going to time in seconds what is the time of exhalation. You're going to breathe out slowly, okay, after this very large inhalation. If at the end of the exhalation, where you can't have any more air come out, equals 20 seconds or less, this means that you don't have a very good tolerance to CO2. This is a poor adaptation. This means you have adrenal fatigue. If your number is between 20 and 40 seconds, this is like average. If the seconds are between 40 and 60 seconds, this is kind of like a little bit above average, but not quite great. But if you can do this between 60 and 80 seconds, you're advanced, or even over 80 seconds, you're an elite athlete. And this brings up a really important thing about exercise. The more fit that you can get your body, the more capacity you can handle stress in life. And that's one important reason why you should get in shape and start exercising. All right, so what does the adrenal need to recover? The most important vitamin, okay, is vitamin C for the adrenals. Why? Because both cortisol and adrenaline and these other neurotransmitters in the inside of the adrenal need vitamin C as a precursor. Very, very important. If you don't have enough vitamin C, you're going to have all sorts of problems. And probably the fatigue that you get from scurvy, which is a severe vitamin C deficiency, is probably a similar thing you're experiencing in adrenal fatigue. But if you look at this image right here, I have a picture of ascorbic acid, which most people think is vitamin C, but really it's just the shell. It's the artificial or synthetic part or one part of the vitamin C complex. In nature, you never see just pure ascorbic acid. You have the whole ball of wax, the whole complex. And this is why it's so important to get a vitamin C from a food extract. The best source would be sauerkraut. Make sure it's raw. You can have like just like 700 milligrams. That's 7x what you normally need with vitamin C from sauerkraut. Also, bell peppers, Any of the leafy green vegetables, lemons, limes, berries, all are loaded with vitamin C. Another really important nutrient is potassium. Okay, you get that from large salads. People that don't have a lot of salad or vegetables and have adrenal fatigue, boy, they have a hard time winding down. You see, potassium is kind of like a physiological tranquilizer. It calms things down. And if you ever hear your pulse rate pound in your ear when you're trying to sleep, that's a potassium deficiency. Potassium is going to help you relax. When I don't consume enough salad, for example, to get my potassium, my sleep isn't that great. I'm kind of on edge. But when I do have enough potassium from salads and things like that, I feel better. I just feel calm. So potassium is necessary. And then with those vegetables also comes magnesium, which is also good for the adrenals, but mainly potassium. Now, sodium is also needed in most cases. If the adrenal glands are really burnt out, you need more salt, sea salt. But unfortunately, people get it from the wrong source: potato chips, corn chips, things like that. You want to get it, just salt your food, more sea salt. That can help as well. Some people, when they consume sea salt, they can breathe better because the pH kind of normalizes from either one extreme to back to normal. The other nutrient that's really important with the adrenal is vitamin B1. Now, vitamin B1 is probably the most important nutrient, not necessarily just for the adrenals, but for the entire autonomic nervous system, especially starting in the brain stem itself, right back here. And that goes right through the adrenal system. So you have a lot of connections between those two. But if you're deficient in B1, boy, you'll have a problem with breathing. And boy, will you have a problem with stress. So B1 can very quickly, within minutes, just calm you down and make things do better within the autonomic nervous system from just a different angle. So, what is the plan and protocol for the adrenal? There's a lot of things that can be done. Number one, um, find the source of stress that you're going through and do whatever you can to fix it. Very important. And then with that, change your viewpoint on just life in general. Just keep a more relaxed viewpoint on things. I did a video on this. Very important just to go through life with a bit of a carefree viewpoint, just a relaxed viewpoint, because unfortunately, when people are under a lot of stress, they get really serious, and that doesn't help them. So you really want to just change the way that you look at things, and even wherever you're holding your tension, you want to relax that. All right, number two, yes, you want to be in a ketogenic diet, but you want to add a little bit more protein. Okay, make sure it's high quality protein. You want to make sure you get enough potassium. So that's the big salads. You also want to get enough vitamin C. Like I said, from the big salads, that can give you the vitamin C as well. And of course, we want that sea salt as well. And the B1, nutritional yeast is a really good source. Get the unfortified version. That's the tweak on the keto. And then the next thing is to start to exercise in a way that builds up your capacity to deal with more stress. Combine that with long walks, aerobic that flushes out that adrenaline and cortisol through the day, as well as higher intensity exercise with short duration, lots of recovery so you can build up your fitness. That is probably going to be one of the most successful things that you can do for stress to counter stress because it's impossible to eliminate it because you live on planet Earth. And the last thing is to add these adaptogens. I like ashwagandha the best, but that herb, boy, it just makes you feel chilled out. It's a really good effect for people that are under stress, and you should just try it. If you've never tried it before, it'll just kind of really mellow you out and help, and just take it as needed. All right, so now you have a plan to actually fix the adrenal body type. But if you haven't seen this video on how to change your viewpoint on stress and be calm during stress, I put that up right here. Check it out.